There you go.
Oh, I don't know where that is, but okay, good.
You got it.
Okay, I think we are now live.
Yep, we're live.
All right.
All right, so I'll let in the waiting room. Welcome everyone to UIC United Faculty's press conference on non-tenure track job security. My name is Sophie Bauer-Schmidt-Sweeney. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a staff organizer for UICUF. Almost half of the full-time faculty teaching, running programs, and doing research at UIC are non-tenure track. These faculty may work at UIC for decades, but will never be eligible for an employment contract longer than 3 years. Many of them are on one-year contracts with no expectation of renewal from 1 year to the next. This lack of institutional commitment to faculty is the result of a budget that prioritizes flexibility and last-minute decision-making over having a stable, secure workforce. The challenges of the pandemic have only made this worse. Last year, UIC quietly cut its NTT faculty by 5%. This year, we're hearing much more optimism about enrollment and a return to campus, but we aren't seeing that optimism reflected in NTT contract renewals. This is why we're calling on the UIC administration to do the following. 1, maintain the current number of NTT faculty positions. 2, notify all faculty of reappointment on or before the initial contractual deadline of June 1st. 3, ensure transparency around budget and reappointment decisions. And 4, suspend the 3-year limit for visiting faculty for this year only in recognition of the particular challenges of the current job market and students' need for stability in their teachers. We'll now hear more on all of these issues from some UIC faculty members. First, we'll hear from Janet Smith, professor in urban planning and policy and president of UICUF. Then we'll hear from Jeff Shirkey, visiting lecturer in history and a member of UICUF's representative assembly. Next is Bowie, visiting lecturer in history. And last is Becky Bonarek, lecturer in the Tutorium in Intensive English and UICUF Impact Bargaining Team member.
Good morning. My name is Janet Smith. I am a professor of urban planning and policy, as stated. I'm also been at UIC for 24 years, and I've been president of UIC United Faculty since 2014, the union that represents more than 1,400 tenure track and full-time non-tenure track faculty at UIC. I want to thank you all for being here, and a special thanks to Bao, Becky, and Jeff for your testimony today. We are a young union, relatively speaking, having formed in 2012. From the start, we organized as one faculty union. And while the University and State Labor Board required us to split into 2 bargaining units, one for the tenure track faculty and one for non-tenure track faculty, we have always been a single unified union of faculty, aiming to lift all boats. Whether for one or many, we are committed to fighting injustice and protecting the academic freedom and voice of all faculty. I am proud of UICUF's efforts to improve the working conditions of our non-tenure track faculty, especially as we watch the corporatization of higher education grow the academic gig economy. Through our contract and advocacy, we've been able to increase job security through multi-year contracts, increase minimum pay for our non-tenure track faculty by 66% since 2014, secure professional development funds, and get the same modified teaching duties for life-changing events as the tenure track faculty have, among other things. But this is not enough. We are here today because we do not want a repeat of last year, or for that matter, what has happened most years before the pandemic. We recognize that last spring clearly presented uncertainty for faculty enrollment. However, before that, and despite growth in student enrollment, setting a new record every year since 2015, many of our non-tenure track faculty have routinely faced uncertainty about their fall semester as they reawait appointment, often well into the summer. While our contract requires notification by June 1st, that does not preclude making reappointments sooner, especially as registration for continuing students the vast majority of our enrollment begins in March. I point this out because so often the focus is on the incoming freshmen, which we care about. However, we cannot forget our continuing students, students who depend on our current faculty. As I like to think about it, faculty retention and student retention are intertwined. While we believe that all faculty are essential workers at UIC, we also understand that many non-tenure track faculty are really the frontline staff for this university, as they teach a majority of our freshmen. As we hear from our students, they look to these faculty as they do our tenure track faculty for support and guidance through their time at UIC. To most, the distinction of a faculty member's track is not how they know them. They are teachers and mentors, and more lately, counselors providing emotional support. Yet every year, despite evidence of sufficient and even increasing enrollment, the non-tenure track faculty hear much more about budget cuts and uncertainty than they do about how important they are in the university's teaching mission and in the retention and the lives of thousands of our students. Turning to the budget, one reason we are speaking today as the Board of Trustees meets is that they make decisions that directly impact our UIC budget. Now, this is not to take responsibility from our UIC administrators, who this past year cut funds going to colleges and even took back funds they had previously allocated. However, we have to look further up the decision-making chain at the level of the system to understand why it is that when enrollment and tuition revenue increases, we still do not have enough money to cover the cost of teaching our classes. In simple terms, we have a structural deficit problem, which means we do not have enough money coming to cover costs. In part, this is due to decades of disinvestment in public higher education in Illinois, but complicating that is the fact that the board has frozen tuition for 5 years and not offered much to make up the difference, at least from what we see at UIC. I suspect it's a bit different at UIUC, which, by the way, is my alma mater. Now, before someone says, faculty union president suggests tuition should be raised, let me be clear that I point this out because while a tuition freeze may sound good to the public, our students are wise to the game. They know they will pay in other ways as fees and other costs increase annually. And they also understand that faculty are not the biggest part of the budget pie on this campus. Sadly, it's often the deferred maintenance of our buildings. Yet if you were to look at the materials in today's board packet, you would see a report that shows a couple $2 billion, that is with a B, sitting in an investment portfolio earning interest. That is money being used to make money. And that money is not necessarily then being reinvested in UIC or its faculty. Today, I ask the Board of Trustees to shift its investment intention from Wall Street to Halsted Street. If you truly value the diversity at UIC, which includes our students and our non-tenure track faculty, then show it and don't just flaunt it. And match your public optimism about a robust fall semester with public action to assure full-time non-tenure track faculty are retained for the coming academic year. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Shirkey. It's SCHUHRKE. I would have a background like everyone else, but I have a map behind me and the ocean on the map screws it all up, so sorry. I'm a visiting lecturer in the history department here at UIC. Now, what my job title means as a visiting lecturer is not that I have a secure position at another institution and that I'm simply visiting UIC. I'm actually teaching at UIC as my full-time job. This past academic year, for example, I've been a full-time faculty member. But as a visiting lecturer, what that means is my continued employment from one year to another is always unknown until practically the last minute because I'm a contingent faculty member. So this morning, we're talking about some of the problems of job security that come with being a contingent non-tenure track faculty member at UIC and how our union is organizing to address these problems. But to be clear, the problem of faculty contingency is not limited to UIC at all. This is a problem across all of higher education in the United States. And this chronic job insecurity for NTT faculty didn't just start with the pandemic. It's been going on for years, even decades. Now, to many people outside of academia, and even to many college students, they often imagine that university professors have very secure, stable, protected jobs through tenure, but the reality is very different. According to the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, which our union is affiliated with, over 70% of all the teaching appointments in higher education in the United States today are non-tenure track, over 70%. This is in large part a result of the corporatization of higher ed, with greater and greater shares of university budgets going towards things like administrator salaries or campus real estate projects instead of going towards educating students. And also with university boards like the U of I Board of Trustees, which is meeting right now, made up primarily of business executives and bankers and lawyers instead of educators and scholars. For contingent non-tenure track faculty like me, university administrations often implicitly say that what we do isn't a real job or a career, but rather simply a gig. For example, when contingent faculty get laid off, which happens a lot, administrators are always very careful to never actually call it a layoff, but instead to call it a non-renewal, again, with the implication being that it's a gig and not a real job. As if teaching hundreds of university students full-time is something that you just do on the side to earn some extra cash. I mean, the reality is this is our profession, it's our livelihood. We spend countless hours doing all of the reading, writing, and other work that goes into preparing lectures, coming up with creative ways to engage students in the classroom, creating assignments, exams, and other assessments, grading those assignments, exams, and assessments, offering constructive and useful feedback to students. We form an important bond with our students, not only teaching them, but also mentoring them, encouraging them, helping them get through difficult situations, especially this past year with the pandemic, offering advice, directing them towards volunteer or internship opportunities, writing letters of recommendation, etc. And by the way, we're also still scholars trying to fit in time to do research, to write, to publish, to attend and present at academic conferences. We do all of this, which requires tremendous knowledge, skill, dedication, compassion, patience. And yet, because of the structure of contingent academic employment, university administrations effectively tell us all the time that we're disposable. They don't say it in so many words, but effectively that's what they're telling us, that we're simply serving at the pleasure of administrators and that they'll kick us to the curb without a second thought. It's really jarring, the vital labor we provide to the university on the one hand, and then how university administrations treat us on the other hand, as if we're disposable. It's a system that really unnecessarily creates anxiety and uncertainty for us, which ultimately hurts the students who rely on us and degrades the educational academic mission of universities like UIC. We know that fixing this broken system isn't going to happen overnight. We know that it's unlikely anytime soon that our jobs will be 100% totally guaranteed, but contingent non-tenure track faculty at UIC and other universities all across this country need and deserve more job security, more stability than we currently have, and more respect than university administrations currently give us. Thank you.
Next is Bao Bui, visiting lecturer in history.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bao Bui. I'm a visiting lecturer in the history department. And for the past academic year, I've taught a total of 8 classes, 4 classes each semester. So I'll speak something to the nature of what it's like to be a college professor during this very most unusual and challenging academic year. As is widely known across America, many classes from K through 12 all the way to higher education went online this year. And is this perception that online teaching involves less work for the teachers because we can teach from home in our pajamas, but this is false. Online teaching actually involves more work, not less work, because we are called upon to do all the things that we did before, as well as taking on new tasks and new challenges, given what our students and our own families and ourselves are going through this past academic year. In short, online teaching requires us to give more time and more emotional energies to our students, particularly during this pandemic time. We have to make more accommodations for our students, particularly as they themselves and their families undergo personal emergencies. And often the non-tenured track faculty members who do a lot of the teaching, both at UIC and all across America, often we're the only face and voice of the university that many of these students know. And remember, many of our students are first generation college students, or often they come from very distressed economic backgrounds. And so for them, we are the face of the university. We are their link to higher education. We are the ones who get them through these classes and get them the credits that they will need as they move forward towards their college graduation. The university, throughout this past academic year, has called upon us to give 110%, to be flexible, adaptive, responsive, and to do all that we can to support the students and the university's mission. Newsflash, we were already doing that before the pandemic began. And now, as enrollment recovers, the economy opens up, and we can see a way out of this pandemic, it's our jobs, to which we have given so much this past academic year, it's our jobs that are on the chopping block. As the spring semester neared its end, the university still expected us non-tenure track faculty to perform at the top of our game, all the while keeping us in the dark with the grim news that we were looking at the end of our academic careers due to budget cuts, which of course seems to make very little sense, given the given the positive glowing news that the university puts out. And I just want to add that this whole arrangement is simply unfair to both us as teachers and to the students to whom we have given so much during this last 15 months of the pandemic. I'll end there.
Hello, everyone. My name is Becky Benarek, and I'm a non-tenure track lecturer in the Tutorium in Intensive English at UIC. I'd like to talk to you today about what non-tenure track faculty are experiencing over the summer and how our demands support good pedagogy. I teach international students exclusively. For the past academic year, I have started nearly every workday before 6 a.m. so that my students studying all over the world can attend class at a reasonable hour for them while continuing to receive the same standard of education. Saying it's been a rough year would be an understatement, but I and my students finally feel confident and comfortable, if not entirely happy, with this mode of instruction. Now we are yet again being asked to overhaul our method of instruction without clear guidelines or goalposts or training. What training we are receiving is a series of webinars, asynchronous and synchronous, that is highly recommended, even though there are multiple issues with this non-requirement requirement. First, NTT faculty may be off contract for the summer and therefore not technically working or getting reimbursed to do this technological preparation. If I'm not teaching over the summer, I use that time to do more professional development that is part of the requirements for my position. The question becomes, do I complete the voluntary training and course development and ignore work that not only helps further the case for my rehire, but also fulfills me personally? Do I not complete the training and potentially doom myself to endless hours of prep in the week before fall semester starts? Or do I try and do everything and burn out after a year that has already burnt me to a crisp? Second, we have no idea whether we'll actually be teaching the courses we're preparing for. The training begins June 1st, a month and a half before the final date by which the university has to notify us of reappointment. Access to more training materials will only be available after June 15th. NTT faculty could complete the series, fully prepare some of their courses, training, and pedagogy for the fall, only to be told they're no longer welcome back at UIC. The questions from before still stand. Do I prepare only to be let down? Or do I let myself down by waiting to prepare? This choice is blatantly unfair to ask of us. It's impossible to train if you don't know the game. The same goes for teaching. Add in the anxiety around not knowing, and it becomes even worse. Will I have a job? Will I need to search for a new one in an incredibly difficult higher ed market? Will I be able to pay my rent, mortgage, childcare? Will I have health insurance? The rhetoric around the summer training we're receiving is extremely hopeful for a positive student experience. Yet none of that positivity is directed at the NTT faculty teaching and guiding those students. The administration is optimistic about enrollment figures, but none of that optimism extends to our job security. So I'll provide some hope through concrete solutions. First, complying with the union's demand that departments notify NTT faculty of reappointment by June 1st eliminates literally every question I've asked so far. Meeting this deadline and being transparent about the process eases our anxiety and allows us to focus on our academic and pedagogical pursuits. Second, the university should abide by the class size recommendations set forth in its own training. Smaller class sizes means more sections are needed, which means departments will be able to employ more faculty to teach those sections, and the current number of NTT faculty could be maintained. Coupled with a 1-year suspension of the 3-year limit for visiting faculty, this solution seems like a win for everyone. More NTT faculty retained, more students with access to pedagogically sound and safe education, and a university administration that satisfies everyone. Our demands support good pedagogy. If the university truly values its faculty as much as it says it does, show us. Commit to maintaining the current number of NTT teaching faculty positions. Commit to notifying us of our reappointment by the initial contract deadline. Commit to being transparent. Commit to suspending the visiting faculty limit. Through these commitments, the UIC administration would really demonstrate what it values and what this university rests on, its faculty. As faculty, we start working before the clock starts, and we stop working long after it stops. The work is never really finished. I love my job, my students, my colleagues. All we're asking for now is a little bit of that love to be reflected back to us. We demand that the administration of UIC comply with the union's asks and show us that love.
Thank you all for your statements and speaking to your experience. We'll now have some question and answer. So for those who are watching the live stream, you can put your questions into the comment box and then we'll pass them along to the speakers. Okay, we have a question from Chris Canich. Why is the June 1st deadline an important deadline for faculty to know whether they'll be reappointed?
I could at least take part of that one. The June 1st deadline is especially important this year because UIC is requiring us to take these technology education courses, and the start of that course is June 1st. So again, we're left with the choice between, do we start preparing these courses and taking this training online before we even know if we're being reappointed, or do we sit and wait until mid-July and we've already lost 6 weeks of training? We've lost the synchronous content from this online training course. It's a catch-22 in that case. So by notifying NTT faculty of their reappointment by June 1st, the initial contractual deadline, then all reappointed NTT faculty can start preparing for their courses in the fall right away without losing any time and without being anxious over the summer.
I'd just like to add, thank you, Becky. I'd like to add that just because you have a deadline of June 1st, and we have the subsequent after that, a deadline of July 15, where it has to be firm. We've always said that you can let people know sooner. There's nothing that prevents it. It says June 1st, you have to tell us, yes, you do, but you can always tell us sooner. They could tell us today that faculty are being renewed. We've been asking for this for a while. We began this conversation really during the pandemic and brought it up last year with the same concerns that Becky's raising today, which is this catch-22. We are trying to be active now in getting the university to be proactive and to actually recognize that this catch-22 is not a good situation for anyone. And so that they would respond to it sooner. But what we've been hearing is that there's just budget crisis. And we have not been hearing that, yeah, that's a great idea.
And if I could add also one other reason why having earlier notification that we're going to have jobs in the fall is just helping us with planning our lives in general, and especially when it comes to looking for other work. Putting out applications elsewhere and maybe getting tentative offers, but not sure if you should accept them or and especially if these are opportunities you're applying to that might be in different parts of the country or something like, am I going to have to move, or should I stay here and wait until I find out if I have a job here? Or all of that kind of uncertainty and anxiety is just really not fair. And it is kind of, I think somebody said the other day, so this is not my original words, but I agree with it, that it's sort of like we're being held hostage by being forced to wait until the last minute. Like they don't want us to run away and leave because they might say, oh, you might have something, but they're not going to guarantee it until the latest they possibly can. So we're kind of like unable to figure out if we should look for work elsewhere, go somewhere else, or stay here. When I think generally we would all very much prefer to just stay here and continue with our jobs that we already have, and continue working with the same students that we've been working with for the last several years.
I can say we have excellent faculty, but we've lost excellent faculty because they're just tired of the waiting game. And so I think that's the other thing about retention, is that there's not enough attention to retention of our faculty and all the insecurities that you just hear everyone talking about on the screen today.
We have another question from Karen Sandloss. What steps will UIC administrators take to ensure transparency in the process of reappointing NTT faculty? And maybe you all could speak to what steps UIC administrators could be taking, even if they are not planning to right now.
Well, for one thing, just right now, there really isn't much transparency at all in these decisions. All we hear is that it's based on enrollments, and we'll have to wait and see what the enrollments will be. But then at the same time, the administration says enrollments are looking great. They're very optimistic about enrollments, but then they're very pessimistic about us having jobs in the future. So it doesn't like, really go together well. They could also be more like upfront and honest about these decisions, because a lot of it seems like, they're talking about that they're broke and they don't have any money, but then enrollments are always at record highs every year after, 1 year after the next. I think $80 million is coming to the university from the latest relief package, which 40 million will have to go towards students, which is the right thing to do. But the other half, part of that at least, can be used to retain faculty. So, the arguments they do provide don't seem to mesh with reality either. So there could be more honesty. But they could also do some of the things that we're saying, let us know by, in our union contract, it does say they should aim to let us know by June 1st every year, so they can let us know by June 1st or earlier. And just, yeah, more general communication and honesty, but I'm sure someone else could add more to this.
I think an important thing to note is that generally faculty are retained because they're good teachers. And so what we're hearing is there's nothing really talking about how good a teacher you are or how bad a teacher you might be, which is really, I mean, we understand that if a teacher's not performing or any staff person is not performing, administrators included, that there's reasons to let them go for performance. But what we're hearing is we're not even looking at your performance. And so one of the things that we are concerned about is that for faculty who, if you had to leave, you'd want to know why. And if it's just the budget, at least that's an honest statement, but we're not confident that that's the real reason. And so what faculty don't know is really how they're doing. So we've been pushing for that contractually for actually to include sort of what faculty performance, how that contributes to decisions about reappointment. So I think in transparency, we would want to know and have a consistent review process, just like tenure track faculty are supposed to have. Non-tenure track faculty are covered by the same policy, yet the difference in treatment is noticeable in terms of reviewing and giving feedback and treating them as faculty who are going to continue rather than just a budget item.
Thanks. And we have a question from Christine May. How do other universities model better practices in faculty retention procedures?
I think you stumped us because I think, as we've noted, most universities now are much more of a corporate model. And so I would argue that the fact that the universities, this is a hypothesis, we could test it, that probably have the best treatment of their non-tenure track faculty and how they work with reappointment are ones that at least have a faculty union. So where they have contractual obligations laid out to protect those faculty. We see that there are other universities, interestingly, there's legislation right now in the state of Illinois about notification for community college and non-tenure track faculty, so who are, adjunct faculty, so at any university or college, who are less than half time in terms of notifications. So I think what we're having to think about here is it's maybe not just depending on a university or college to come up with a protocol besides a contract, which is what we've done and what other universities have done, faculty have done, but also to start to look at our state legislature, to look at how they treat us as workers, faculty are workers, and to think about protections that are needed, just like other workers need protections for job security. So much of what people are talking about, because sadly we've learned so much about insecurity and particularly gig work in this time of COVID. So if we start to reframe what the problem is and look to not just a individual university solving the problem, but actually start to talk about our state legislature to change the conditions. So things that affect all of our non-tenure track faculty across the state of Illinois, which, as Jeff pointed out, sadly is becoming the majority of our faculty teaching on our campuses. We need to think seriously about what protections we can put in place for all of them as workers.
I would also add, I know from speaking with faculty members here at UIC who also teach at other places to help make ends meet, that other universities in Chicago are sending out appointment notices now, even while UIC is waiting to do so. We can maybe take one more question before we wrap up. Here we have another question from Karen. You mentioned that we do not want a repeat of what happened this time last year. Can you say more about the issues with lack of transparency that our NTT faculty faced last year, either speaking from your own experience or from colleagues that you know?
Just briefly, and someone else can add to this, I'm sure. As I understand, last summer there was, what was it, about 5% of non-tenure track faculty were laid off, or as I said, that the university never calls it a layoff, they call it non-renewal. So they were not renewed. They were laid off before the fall semester started, citing the university was saying, well, the pandemic is going on, enrollments are going to be down. And then enrollments wound up being very strong in the fall. But they didn't end up rehiring all those people that they laid off. And I know for people who didn't get reappointed, who were laid off, they were never given any reason at all. They were just left waiting to see if they were going to get reappointed, and waiting and waiting and waiting until they finally realized, it finally sunk in that it just wasn't going to happen. The semester already started and they were still waiting, and they knew, oh, I guess I've been laid off. The university didn't actually notify them. They just left them hanging indefinitely, which is, like I said, it's just pure disrespect. At least tell people something instead of just stringing them along indefinitely and then nothing. Really terrible, terrible behavior.
I can add a couple things. One thing that I thought was an egregious practice that we don't want to ever see happen again was courses being advertised with particular faculty who were well-known non-tenure track faculty teaching at UIC. So they were advertising their courses to encourage students to sign up. Yet those faculty did not have contracts. They didn't know if they were teaching in the fall. They just knew that their face and a description of the course they were going to teach was put out on a flyer. So I think that's one thing that is very concerning, and we don't want to see that ever again. The other thing is that we have some faculty, and this gets a little into the weeds of how the university works, but appointments are done somewhat differently depending on whether you're a 9-month or a 12-month appointment or 11-month. There's all these different things. But we had some faculty who got notice of layoff or not reappointment at May 15th. So they had just gotten done grading, right? And turning in grades, and then they were just dropped. So they had really little time to plan, and also had, literally their insurance cut off, different things, as Jeff pointed to, and others that, in terms of the things that you need, we all need to be able to have money to be able to survive, to support and survive. So, the one thing we did as a union, at least, was put together, a fund to help support our faculty who were laid off, who needed it for whether it was rent or for health care. But I think it's really important to recognize that kind of layoff practice, that sort of quickly happening, is something we never want to see again. But also, I think it's just never, ever should be allowed that you advertise courses and then not have those faculty reappointed. The other thing we did was we had faculty who were being told that they had to train for teaching online, and they didn't have a reappointment. And so we had to push hard again on that. We shouldn't have to do that. It should be a logical thing. I can't imagine an administrator saying, oh yeah, I'll do that, even though I don't have an appointment.
All right, thank you all. Thank you to our speakers and to everyone who is watching. Would any of you like to make a short final statement before we wrap up?
Unionize your workplace.
All right.